You're watching Euronews Now. I'm Takun Bersilako with your top stories. Russia now says there's hope of reaching a compromise after Ukraine said peace talks are starting to sound more realistic. But the bombing continues. We'll have the latest. NATO defense ministers are meeting for the first time since the war started to consider their response. And free at last, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman held for 6 years accused of trying to overthrow the Tehran government, is on her way home.
These are the deadly scenes Kiev's mayor is trying to avoid, placing the Ukrainian capital under a 35-hour curfew. People have been told to stay indoors as Russian troops look to encircle the city. Residents had only hours to stock up on groceries and medicines. This as peace talks continue between Russia and Ukraine.
It's important. It's difficult but important because any war ends in an agreement. Meetings continue. As I'm told, the positions in the negotiations sound more realistic. However, there still needs to be more time for decisions to be in Ukraine's interests.
These people have just left the besieged city of Mariupol. About 20,000 managed to flee on Tuesday through a humanitarian corridor. Residents have been trapped in the city by Russian shelling, many without heating, electricity and running water for nearly 2 weeks. As evacuation efforts continue, Russian forces have captured a hospital in Mariupol and taken patients and staff hostage. The regional governor says 400 people are being kept in the basement. More than 100 Red Cross buses have poured into the northeastern city of Sumy for a safe passage operation approved by Russian forces. They're heading towards Lubny, but might not be able to take a direct route.
Many Kiev residents still left in the Ukrainian capital have spent last night and will be spending most of today in shelters like this one. Parking lots, basements, metro stations have turned to bunkers, the only safe space left in a city increasingly targeted in the midst of fighting between Russian troops and the Ukrainian army. The mayor of Kiev has declared a 35-hour curfew, saying that this is a difficult moment for the Ukrainian capital after at least 5 people were killed when multiple areas, residential areas across the city, were hit by shelling. The people left in this once bustling capital of 3 million residents say they are ready to stay put and put up a fight. Most of them are involved in the resistance movement in one way or another and now vow to defend their city, whatever the consequences. On Tuesday, this crisis has hit another grim milestone. The number of people who have fled the conflict and crossed the border, leaving Ukraine and effectively becoming refugees, has surpassed 3 million. According to UNICEF, half of them are children. Annalise Borges is in Kiev for Euronews.
It was a show of support like no other. Ukraine's embattled President Volodymyr Zelensky declared, with allies like this, we will win this war. The Prime Ministers of Poland and his deputy, plus the leaders of Czech Republic and Slovenia, arrived in Kiev on a mission to show solidarity. They're the very first Western visitors to Kiev since the war began nearly 3 weeks ago. Photos of the meeting show Zelensky briefing the EU leaders on the latest military and humanitarian situation and the negotiations with Russia.
With such friends, with such countries and neighbors and partners, we will be able truly to defeat. I don't want to say who. We all know it.
We will never leave you alone. We will be with you because we know that you are fighting not only for your homes, for your freedom, for your security.
The four all left before the imposition of a new city curfew. They claimed that they were on an EU mission, but officials from the 27-nation bloc have insisted that they had undertaken the trip independently.
Well, NATO defence ministers are meeting today in Brussels for the first time since the Russian invasion of Ukraine to discuss the medium and long-term objectives for European security. One of the other priorities on the agenda is concerns around a false flag operation relating to chemical weapons. We heard yesterday from Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, who said, of course, that Russia has used chemical weapons in the past in the UK against Alexei Navalny, and he said facilitated the use of chemical weapons in Syria by the Assad regime. So there are concerns about this, given what Russia has been saying about potentially Ukraine, for example, creating chemical weapons. Also, we have heard that Joe Biden, the US president, will be joining NATO for another extraordinary meeting on March 24th for heads of state and government, where again the issue of Russia and Ukraine will be top of the agenda.
As Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues, Euronews sat down with Moscow's ambassador to the EU, Vladimir Chizov. The Russian diplomat carried on with the same Kremlin narrative, despite multiple questions about the horrors being witnessed. He repeated what Moscow has said since the beginning of the war, that it's not an invasion, but a special military operation with the ultimate goal of demilitarizing and denazifying Ukraine.
So when we see all these people, it's almost 2 million people, according to the agencies, refugee agencies, fleeing the war, leaving the country and seeking, let's say, for a shelter in Europe. Are all these people Nazis?
Well, actually, you named a figure of 2 million. Could be even more. Do you count those who fled to Russia in that figure? Because many Ukrainian citizens fled to Russia. Mm-hmm. Perhaps not the same numbers as to Poland, where they are greeted with open arms, contrary to what we saw quite recently with the Syrian and other Middle Eastern refugees in Poland. But anyway, I understand that people are trying to escape the zone of conflict.
So as the situation is still ongoing, you, as an EU ambassador, are you still in touch with EU diplomats here in Brussels, and what are you telling them?
Yes, of course. I explained to them the motivation and the reasoning behind Russia's own activities. I also inquire what they think and what the EU as an entity thinks, besides this, I would say, obsession with sanctions. So my president is talking to the president of the council, Charles Michel.
We've heard the Finnish president saying, after having talked to Putin, that this is not anymore in the Russian demands, the resigning of this government, of Ukrainian government. Do you confirm that?
I believe that whoever is any future Ukrainian government is up to the Ukrainian people to decide.
So you can even work with this government that is now in power?
It's very difficult to actually even speak to this government because they are producing confusing signals all the time. One day they say one thing, next day they say a totally different thing, and they're quite irresponsible, I should say.
Chizov says the West sanctions strategy against Russia is an obsession, but he remains optimistic that relations are not completely broken, despite being at tipping point.
Time for us to take a break on the programme. Don't go anywhere, though. We'll be back in a few moments.